repositories get. Hi, I'm Jackie Werner. Since the recording missed the first few minutes, I'm talking about research data management, the good, the bad, the ugly of it, and why you should care about it. So, back to the good. No, back to the good. All right. So as I said, data management, your data can be an asset. You can publish your data in data-specific journals. You could also publish it in a repository, such as our digital commons. There are also data-specific repositories, such as Dryad or Figshare. And there's subject-specific data repositories. You can also get credit for that data, just as if somebody cited your papers. If it's published in a data journal, that's obvious. But if you look at alt metrics or alternative metrics, which are not just how often people are citing things, you can get you can have a lot of use of your data, and that you can bring to committees and just use it to show. Hey, you should keep on hiring me because I've done. Not only have I published this, I've gotten a lot of use of my data that I've collected, and that's also great for just science in general. Being able to share data and use other people's data, and not have to reinvent the wheel every time you do it. All right, the bad. So the bad isn't actually bad, but it's kind of an extra step, which points out why you should care about data management. And the bad is data as a requirement. So more and more funding bodies are requiring that you pay attention to how you're using your data in different ways. NIH grants. Now, any grant above $500,000 requires that you submit a data sharing plan. Basically, they want you to share the data you collect, or in certain cases, at least say why it's not possible to share it, like with patents, something like that. The NSF, any type of grant, any monetary value, requires you to submit a data management plan, which is usually about a 2-page document on how you're going to be managing your data throughout the whole project, including any sort of sharing afterwards. And we'll go over one tool that helps you write a data management plan. Also, a reasonable number of journals are starting to require that you share your data or request that you share your data. For example, PNAS. I have a quote from their policies. To allow others to replicate and build on work published in PNAS, authors must make materials, data, and associated protocols, including code and scripts, available to readers. Then we have the National Research Council, which in a 2003 publication basically recommended that you always try to share your data. So all these links are going to be available on our research guide, which I'll show you at the end of the presentation. And at first glance, this can just seem like, oh my God, it's another step to do while doing my research. This is just extra paperwork. But as I'm going to be going over here, over the rest of the presentation, having something like a data management plan done or data sharing, thinking about it from the beginning, it can make your research everything goes so much smoother. And for examples, how we have the ugly. Data as a liability. Our first example, our postdoc left, and now no one knows where the data is or what it means. If you have one person dealing with data and you don't know what folders they're storing with, and there's no record of what all these variable names mean, you're going to have a problem. If all your data is just basically predicated on one person knowing and having in their head, knowing what they're doing, it's going to be bad if you don't have access to that person anymore. Next one, where did all that PHI go? For HIPAA compliance, you have to keep track of what you're doing with protected health information. And again, knowing your data management plan at the beginning, knowing what you're doing with your data, will make it very easy to know what you need, who has access to protected health information, and what you have to do with it. And the last one, aren't we supposed to dispose of this data? You should know at the beginning how long you have to keep your data. A lot of grants, like the NIH, will tell you how long you have to keep. You have to have access to your data. If you're sharing it, it could be basically forever. But then you don't have to keep hold of the copies on your computer forever. So, what can I do? And we're going to go over 3 different aspects of data management that can help you. 1 is understanding the data lifecycle. 2, following best practices, which is going to be the bulk of this. And 3 is developing a data management plan. So, first one, the data lifecycle. I never trust it when it makes a little noise. So if anyone's listening, I'm sorry if it stopped recording, in which case you won't be able to hear this anyway. But, all right, the data lifecycle. So there are actually many different interpretations of what the data lifecycle is. I went with this one, which is from the NYU Library's Data Management Planning Guide. And the really important thing that we want to get from this is that the research data lifecycle is not just one part during the process. You shouldn't be going after finishing your whole project. Oh, I'm supposed to be publishing this data. Let's try to organize everything now. You want to be considering it the entire time. So the first one is creating data, and that's when you're actually gathering data. Also included in that is the planning. You should know before you even start your experiment or your study exactly what data you're going to be collecting. You should know that, okay, I'm taking blood draws every month, so I want to write that down. I'm going to be taking pictures of this mouse brain, take different slides. There's going to be 5 slides per brain and however many brains. And these are things that you could end up building on as you do the study, but you should definitely just know all the types of data that you are going to have, which should be part of planning your study because you want to know your methods before you start anyway. Next part is processing data. So that's basically going to be cleaning up data and getting it from something raw to something that you can actually work with to do your analysis. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm not going to go into detail on cleaning up data, but something to keep in mind is that you should be basically keeping track of what you're doing here too. Don't just like, okay, I'm going to delete all the everything without a response for this variable, without actually writing down, this is what I'm doing. Next is analyzing data, and that's pretty straightforward. That's going to be, well, not straightforward for you, but it's going to be getting your analyses, getting your results. So that's going to be putting it in statistical programs, maybe running certain code on it, etc. Then we have preserving data and publishing data. So these kind of go hand in hand. Preserving data is going to be how are you going to be preserving and publishing is going to be, are you going to actually publish the data? If not, how long do you have to keep this data according to your institution, according to this grant? And that could include publishing, could include just keeping it on a hard drive and a few other places. And the last one is reusing data, where you could take data from other people, or other people can be taking your data and using it for something like reproducibility or just continuing on the studies. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. If there's a huge amount of data out there and you think that there's something interesting you could get from it, then there's half the cost. There's most of the cost of your study there. It's already been done. All right. So next part is best practices. And there are a lot of best practices. I have them linked on a research guide. I'm just going to go over some of the most important ones. And we're going to go step by step here. So the first step is planning. When you're planning your study, you're going to want to think about your data backup policies here. If you're storing, now you should be storing your data in 3 different places. We'll talk about that later on in the preservation step. But depending on what data you have, you should also keep track of, you want to think about backing up your non-digital data. So digital data is easy enough to back up. But what about your paper lab notebooks or paper surveys? You want to also be considering what you're doing with how you're backing those up, which is probably going to be making them digital. Another important step, you want to assign responsibilities for your data. So this is something you want to know from the beginning. Who is going to be responsible for keeping track of this data? Who is making sure that the backups are done? Who is looking into the publication of data? Who is going to be making sure that data entry is double checked? And you want to know which person is doing this. If you're having a long study and somebody's going to be, your physicians are going to be leaving halfway through that, you want to know, you want to have an idea of this and know, okay, here's the policies for making sure the next person knows what the last person. Next step, you want to determine potential repositories or journals for your data. And so if you're going to be publishing, if you want to publish your paper, then you probably want to have an idea of what journals you might be looking at from the very beginning, because this is a good place to look at their policies and see, okay, I think I want to publish in PNAS, and they want me to publish my data as well and have a DOI for it. All right, in that case, I'll make sure to have that prepared from the beginning. Last thing is determining your budget for data. So something that people don't always consider is that costs for data can be part of your grant application. That includes data storage. If your repository, if you look at a repository that has fees for publishing data on it, you can include all that in your grant application, especially if it's something like NIH where it's required. So think about that at the beginning, and then you don't have to spend your own money on it, which is nice. All right, next step. When you're collecting data, you want to define and list the types of your data and file formats at the beginning. So like I talked about, know exactly what you're collecting. Then you'll want to choose naming conventions. And I'm going to be showing an example of this later. But you want your file names to be clear. You will also want to have a Readme file that talks about what all these file names mean. But the best case scenario is to be, you look at a file and you know exactly what's in this. You always want to include the same info in the same order. You never want to use the same name in different folders. For example, you don't want a file named data.xlsx even if one is in like the control group folder and the other one's in the experimental group folder. Just in case something goes wrong, you want to know, look at the files by name and not just what folder they're in. When you're naming something, you want to use underscores and camel case instead of spaces. I'll have an example of that on the next page. Yes?
What is camel case? I don't know that I've ever heard.
Camel case, I'll pop over here. You see at the beginning it says Aether Rat. So that's when you have capital letters, like its title case, but there are no spaces in it. And that's a good way to show the separation of words without having an underscore or a space. And the reason we don't want spaces is because some programs or file systems don't play nice with them. So it's easier to just have a file name that can be read by anything. And the last thing is that you want to make sure your file names are extensible. So if you have, if at the end of a file name you have EX001 or EX1. If you have EX1, the way things are going to be sorted is EX1, EX10, EX11. If you have EX001, it's going to go EX001, EX002, and actually be in the correct order. And last thing you want to know to do when you're collecting data is you want to preserve the raw data before you clean it for analysis. So basically, you're going to want to save your raw data, your cleaned up data, and then your analyzed data. It seems like overkill, but again, if something goes wrong, you want to have all steps of that so you can know exactly what's going on. And so that other people can use your data. And if they want to reproduce exactly what you did, they can do it off the raw data. All right, so here's an example of a file, of a good file name here. And as you could see, yes. All right, each part of this is going to tell you something important. So first is Aether Rat, which is the name of the series of experiments. Next, we have EX012. This is the experiment number. Norm, in this case, means that we're looking at a mouse with a normal heart. Lipitor tells the type of treatment provided. And then 056 is the slice number. .tif means it's an image. Yes?
With the things that you're going to be talking about, do you know the file length max? Because if you don't know that ahead of time, you're going to get chopped.
It's recommended, I think, to keep it under 25. What I'd say is basically
because you want as much information as possible.
Right.
But when you do multiple folders, you will run into a file length problem.
In that case, I would just try to pick the most important information that you want to have in here, and then, for example, if Aether Rat, you can chop off Aether Rat and just have that as a folder.
So, Chris, your question is, how do you know what the maximum
know,
file length is?
We know specifically that if your files, you are naming them too long, when they get copied, you have that folder and then you have the other folder. You will reach a file limit before it truncates. So you have to be careful. In the system that you're in, whatever that system is. Right, and if the NIH is in a very similar manner, you need to know that limit before you start naming things. Because otherwise, when it goes to copy, it's going to truncate it and you're going to lose all your important data.
If you even get the data. I've also seen some of the data doesn't copy. Try to copy one system to another. Some of the data just doesn't copy because it says sorry, it's too long.
So you have to go in and either manually do it or it'll auto truncate it and lose all your data.
All right, so that is a very good point. You do not want to make your file names too long. So if that's the case,
and even files, you want to be careful about making them too deep. You have the same problem because that's part of the file.
Yeah, you're at 31, so you would have to figure out, like abbreviate Lipitor, like you said, make a whole folder for Ather Rat.
Okay. Yep, so those are important things to consider.
At the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, or else you have problems.
You
that
SOL,
you had to
right,
fix.
right.
And also, remember that you should be having a README for everything, explaining what these file names mean. So if you need to use abbreviations to keep it down low, then that README is going to be extra important because it will tell you exactly what these abbreviations mean. All right. So next of all, when you're describing data. All right, so here we have, like I've been talking about, the README files. And you should have two types of README files. First of all, you're going to want to have a file for your project in general. And that's going to cover the organization of your experiments, who is in charge of everything, what instruments you're using, stuff that applies to everything. Then you want to also have specific READMEs for the contents of these files. So that's where you're going to be talking about, like, what does each part of this file name mean? You want to define the parameters you're looking at, the contents of the folder, what the formats for date and time are, what measurements you're taking, etc. So basically, so you want an overarching README and then specific READMEs talking about each part. You also want to have a meaningful directory hierarchy, which again, yes, you don't want it to be too deep if you could avoid it, but you also want it to make sense. Please don't keep everything just in one folder. Try to keep it so that it's easy to look into so it's easy to know what you're looking at. Next, you want to have a data dictionary. So the data dictionary is going to be cover all the terms that you're using in your file and your folders. Basically, what does each variable mean? If you're using REDCap, which I highly recommend you do, REDCap will generate a data dictionary for you, and which is basically just going to be every single variable that you use with REDCap and information on it. All right, next is when you're processing and analyzing data. You always want to double check data entry. And if you're using REDCap, then once again, there's a really easy way to do this. You can mark any data entry as incomplete until it's been looked at by multiple people. And I don't want to make this class all about REDCap, but REDCap is good not only for outside surveys, but for anything where you're collecting data, like lab bench experiments, anything that you would just be putting stuff into an Excel spreadsheet. You could put in REDCap, and that will be good for basically keeping track of your data, making sure it's protected, and it also helps with data analysis.
So there are two ways of using REDCap. Data entry and keeping your data, you don't have to actually use it as a survey. So there are two prongs of REDCap for data entry and data capture, and also for surveys.
Yes.
But data entry and data capture does not have to turn into a survey.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
So you can have basically only people in your lab are entering the data. They're putting the rat's mood for the day or whatever. And then you could have an actual survey where you send it out and get info from people.
Right. And so it automatically creates your data dictionary for you,
yes.
like an Excel spreadsheet.
Which is very nice.
Yeah.
So,
question?
Can you use it as a relational database? REDCap?
No, that's
Probably like
you have to export it to SPSS, or what's the other one? There's like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But can you use it as if you use Access, for example? Microsoft Access?
It's not quite meant for that.
I didn't think so.
You mean like auto selling and sort and all that stuff?
Kind of like you have different.
You can export it to Excel. I mean, you can export your data
I can,
dictionary too.
well, I can export from Access to Excel to make it prettier because Access reports and things like that are horribly ugly. But to use it as a database so that you can generate reports and things like that.
Yeah,
Probably not.
it depends what you're doing with it. I'd say talk to me if there's something in particular that you're interested in, and we can see if it's doable. All right, and last thing for analysis, you want to document all analyses. And yes,
I don't know if you have mentioned it or will, but I know some journals want to know exactly which version you're using of your analysis.
yes.
Yeah.
This includes like knowing what version of the software you're
Right.
using. What are the exact steps you're taking? So don't just like stick something in SPSS and do the analysis and then just say, okay, that's done. You want to say in SPSS version, whatever, I did step 1, whatever step 1 was, and so on.
Does RedCap have that? If it does any updates, will it give you the version?
Yes. Yeah, RedCap, usually you're going to you will want to write down what version you're using, but normally for the data analysis, you're not going to be doing within RedCap. So it's less important since you're not editing the data within there. All right. Next, we have publishing and sharing data. And once again, you want to document everything. If you are making data cleaner so that you're going to be sharing your data, document every step you did to do that. Next thing, you want to save data in stable formats. So there's a good list of some stable formats on our LibGuide. And what this means is you want to save your data in formats that have lossless data compression and that are supported by multiple software platforms. So you're probably not going to have much data in Microsoft Word, but that would be a bad data format to use because it's proprietary. So instead, you will want to save something in text format. Instead of Microsoft Excel, XLSX, you will want to save it in CSV format. And once again, best way to do this is to save multiple copies of it. So you could save something as an Excel file while you're working on it, and then save it as a .csv, make sure everything goes over properly, and then you could still keep the special features that Excel lets you do. You also want to include documentation with enough information to make your data reusable. So again, there's a huge list of documentation you can include. Some examples are you want to include the title of the project, the creator, a persistent identifier, and if you put your data in a repository somewhere, you can have a DOI. You want who's funding the data, what dates you're using, what file formats you're using, etc. Next is preservation. So there is a lot that goes into data preservation. Basically all of these topics, I could go on for an entire class on any one of them. But when you're preserving data, your best practice is to keep 3 copies of it. You have your original copy of your data, on-site storage, and off-site or remote storage. And there are a ton of storage options, and they also have pros and cons. You have your personal computers or laptops, where, for example, something like that could be stolen, or if there's a fire, be set on fire, and then you could lose it. There's network storage, which you get for free here, and issues with that though. There can be a limit on file size. Then you have external storage, like storing it on Google Docs, which is not secure data storage, but removable storage, like a USB card, like a USB stick. Remote storage, There are a ton of different options. And yes,
Just a comment, if you store things in the R drive on the PCM network, that's R as in research, it's automatically backed up off-site. And
yes,
same thing with the F drives and the M drives. It's automatically backed up off-site and very remotely, so that if something, natural disaster happened in the Philadelphia area, it wouldn't be affected.
which is exactly what you're looking for when you're backing up your data. Yes,
So I'm gonna throw another comment out here. You did mention the USB flash drives. Those are good for temporary storage and moving stuff from one spot to another. But I've seen way too often that people use that for a permanent storage. USB drives are not permanent storage file units. You can only use them, if you don't use them for a while, they actually will lose your data. So make sure that for a permanent storage, you have it on a hard drive, optical drive, something like that, a DVD or CD, disk, things like that. But so the USB are great for, the quick dirty one spot to another, but not for permanent storage. So the F drive, the hard drive, those are permanent storage.
I did not actually know that.
And that's why the R drive was created and the school invested the money to get another server, because a lot of people were buying external hard drives or using thumb drives,
Right.
and that means it's not backed up if it's not on the network, because some things weren't compatible with the network, some of the scientific equipment. So that's why we have R drives.
All right, thank you for that. And also, for example, USB drives can be lost. Not that I would know anything about that. Even something like laptops could be. That brings us to our next point, which is backup regularly. If you're storing it on the R drive, then that's going to be backed up for you. So if you're using something like an external hard drive as one of your 3 copies, then just make sure that you're backing it up, that you have a schedule for it. And any data that is hard to replicate, like if you're, for example, if you're using a living specimen and you can't see, you can't easily get it again what they were doing on their 3rd day of life, then that's something you want to make sure that you're backing up daily, which again, R drive will take care of that for you. All right, you want to store your final data using stable file formats, which I talked about before. You also want to determine the duration of storage, and this depends on your. This will depend on your grant, and I believe institutionally.
Yeah.
What is it? 5 years?
It depends.
All right, so
There's
that,
a policy that John Carlin put together some years ago, but yeah. Some things are 3, some things are 5, some things are more.
so that's something that you want to look up, you want to know beforehand. Also, you have to consider data security. So a lot of these things are going to have some sort of security risk, especially if you're using if you're doing anything that has to be HIPAA compliant with protected health information. You need to know who's going to be able to access this data. Make sure you're not using something you could leave on a bus. And also, data security should be part of your IRB application. So you should be considering this from the beginning. Even if it's something like this data is going to be kept on a computer in a room that is locked unless one of these people is using it, etc. And if possible, you should be able to know who is accessing what and when. Once again, RedCap is really good for this because every person working on your project will have their own unique login. The data log will keep track of everything that's done, and you can even set different access levels for different people. Like maybe your data enterers can't change anything that's been entered before, or they can't export anything with protected health information on it. All right, last step is data management plans. So have any of you made a data management plan before, an official one? All right. So it is not actually as frightening as it could be, but it's usually about a 2-page document that talks about what exactly you're going to be doing with your data. And for this, I have some of the components of the DNP. Data collection, data description, storage, your protection or privacy needs, sharing and access, or preservation. So basically everything that we've just talked about. And here, I have a screenshot of something called DNP Tool, which is a wonderful free website that lets you put together a DNP. And I'll show you how to do this. All right. So here I'm logged into DNP Tool, and anyone can get an account on here. Just say that we are not one of the connected institutions, so you could just create an account with your email. And here I have a plan that I created for a data management class, a sample one. And this lets you, here you just put in your project details, and you can put in your funder, which is great because if it's something like the NSF, where they require you to create a data management plan, it will give you advice on, it'll say exactly what they want for each aspect of this. Right, so I didn't put in an abstract for this one, but they give you a plan overview, and this is an NSF grant for biological sciences, so they tell you exactly what you should be doing. For example, for data and materials produced, it says describe the types of data, physical samples or collections, software, curriculum materials, and other materials to be produced in the course of the project. Let me go over here to write the plan. And here we have the 6 different sections. And let's go over the data and materials produced. So here's what I wrote about the plan. We basically got given a brief proposal of what the experiment will be, and then we had to just write out what data we'd be getting from it. So over here, you can see under data and materials produced, we have under NSF, they have all links to what the NSF requires for this part of the DNP. If you go to DNP Tool, there's also the website's suggestions of what you're going to want to put in a DNP. For instance, indicate which data are of long-term value and should be shared or preserved. And then with comments, you could actually work on this with a collaborator. So if all you are working on a grant proposal or just brainstorming, you could just all comment on each other's work. Do you have a question?
Who posts the data that is stored on that website?
So
is it stored on your institutions, or is it stored elsewhere, which could potentially be hacked and all of the data you're putting in for a grant is now vulnerable?
That is a good question. I know that it's frequently used for NSF grants. So I think that it's definitely a generally respected site. I do not know the details.
Is it
Are you
.org?
putting data in there or just the
No,
management?
right, just
the plan
It's just a
itself,
management
right?
plan, yeah.
Yeah, but basically we wouldn't want your
But you're
all your
laying out
information.
basically all of your plan, which although it's not your data, it's still.
Right, so that's the privacy statement you're at, Jack?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
looks like it's by the University of California Curation Center, UC3, and there's a bunch of universities that it's contributing to. Here's a list of them there, including Data One, Smithsonian Institution. So I don't know I can't give you an answer on exactly what they do to prevent something like that, but considering it's backed by a lot of different universities and science organizations, It seems that it is pretty,
Yeah, and that's not the only one. There's quite a bit out there that are, other universities actually have them that you can use.
Right, and some of them, like some of the analysis sites, the data that gets generated gets purged as soon as you use it. So I don't know if this is something similar that you use their site and it purges the data from it, or if you're creating it and it's getting saved somewhere that potentially could be accessed.
It looks like it's just the plan, just the procedures, not the actual data.
Right.
Yeah, but even if it depends on the way you're setting up your data, your plan.
We can ask the question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering, because I know eventually these things like to spread. So I'd like to ask the question now
Right.
before they start getting hooked in. Because some of the data analysis sites, they're standalone and they purge it after you're done.
it does not seem to, it does not do that. They hold the data provided, and you can request that it is removed.
So it lists 3 legitimate interests there. For
Right.
network and information security purposes, to keep you, whatever, I can't, so.
Keep you up to date with
Right,
news
yeah.
about the tool. That I think is
And to
just like
provide,
your email.
provide access to the tool and personalization of your user experience. Because it provides templates.
Yeah, because I just.
Because it
saw
says the
reading all
processes
those
of-
privacy statements
The
that
processing
are-
of your personal data by UCF is necessary for pursuing the following legitimate interests.
What I would recommend if you're really worried about that is just use the tool. You'll use the tool without actually putting your text into it. So, for example, what you could do is just when you're writing a plan, just go into Word, make a data and materials produce section, and then use this guidance over here without actually entering it and saving it in there. Yeah, so I don't think that it's going to be a problem, but if you're very concerned, you could just use use all the resources they give you without actually saving it in this tool here.
I was just curious because I know students love to do the quickest, easiest way, and then data can get out there for analysis setups that might not be safe.
Yeah, data security is an issue. I think I'm pretty sure you could also probably delete your plans when you're done. Actions. Yes, you could just, if you want, you could just remove it after it's submitted.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, and okay, so that is all I have for the presentation today. And we also have, so this page is currently hidden at the moment, but it should be up within the day. And let me get the URL here. The URL is in our research guides. There's a research guide on research, and then there is going to be a data management tab. So the way to get to that, let's go to library.pcom.edu, go to subject guides, all guides, and then research and publishing. So there's a lot of links here on different aspects of doing research and publishing. And at the bottom, there's going to be a research data management page. This has all the links that we talked about with the data management requirements, including NIH grants. And here we have a lot of different best practices from all different institutions, Stanford Libraries, Cornell University, Dryad, which is a data repository, HIPAA best practices, and down here we have a data management plan. So DNP Tool is the tool I'm talking about, and then we have a lot of just framework and guidelines, including example data management plans. So you can have an idea of like what the NSF is looking for, and it's also, I think, a good idea even if it's not required for grants. because then you have everything set on track, you know exactly what you're doing, and it makes all these other steps a lot easier. Yes.
Quick question about HIPAA. You know, if you're doing educational research, are there similar FERPA tools or guidelines that are accessible to space?
I think so. What I would recommend actually is looking at the HIPAA tools and basically just applying it to FERPA, because it's not going to be the same information, but it teaches you how to handle the information that you want to keep secure.
Yeah, and the PHI is static. It's 11,
18.
oh, it's 18 now. So it doesn't change. So if you know those 18, name, the age, this, that, and the other thing.
You could
Yeah,
email.
yeah.
FERPA's
So,
a little different, but
Yeah, so I don't know what's protected in FERPA. I mean, I'm sure the student's name and social security number. So there may be similarities that way.
I think we would. You would just have to. You probably know like what the FERPA regulations are, and then just apply the lessons on how to protect this data to that. And also, if you are interested in publishing your data,
Like for educational.
if you're interested in publishing your data or keeping it in a repository, then please talk to us at the library. We are definitely willing to host data, just as we have, for example, we'll take unpublished papers or preprints. If you're interested in hosting any of those, also talk to us. But we can definitely look into the best way to share your data, whether it's on our repository or a subject-specific one, and any issues with publishing your data along with your paper, we can look into any of that.
So the Digital Commons, that you don't see from our website, has a service called Repository Services for data storage. So as far as we know, Elsevier says that space is unlimited. So if you
Jefferson uses it.
Yeah, so IT close your ears. So if you don't have if you're looking for something in terms of a backup to whatever the IT R drive, the S drive, or whatnot, in terms of off-site, this is paid for by the library already. There's no additional cost to us to maintain, to have VPress to maintain that storage information.
Do these all work with Chrome? Because I know PubMed still doesn't play well with Chrome. So I'm just wondering if these types of links, etc., if they play well.
I went to all of them on Chrome, so they at least go that far. I haven't heard of any of them having particular Chrome issues. If they do, just either ask us or IT, probably IT. I'll make it work.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. A lot of stuff from the NIH stuff.
Well, the RefWorks does not play with Chrome. Some of the Elsevier doesn't play with Chrome. Some of the searches don't play with Chrome. So
I recommend also downloading Firefox or another browser of your choice.
But not IE.
It's Edge now.
Oh, Edge.
even it.
All right, are there any more questions? Okay, thank you all for coming. And there is so much you could go into for this topic, so anything else you're interested in, please come to me.
And don't forget to sign in if you haven't done so. And before you